He punched her in the cafeteria, right in front of everyone, because he thought a quiet black girl wouldn't fight back and nobody would care. Riverside High cheered like violence was entertainment, and the teachers stood frozen, pretending they didn't see a thing. But the bully didn't know one tiny, inconvenient detail. The girl he tried to break was the daughter of a full-patch Hells Angels member. So while he swung his fist, 10 Harley engines began roaring toward the school, carrying the consequence he never saw coming. The cafeteria at Riverside High always carried the kind of noise that vibrated in your bones. Metal chairs scraping, sneakers thudding across worn tiles, the endless roar of teenage conversations bouncing from wall to wall. At exactly noon, the room felt like a storm with no intention of slowing down. Trays clattered against tables, the lunch line wrapped around the vending machines, and the air smelled like pizza grease mixed with something too close to bleach. It was into this chaos that Lonnie Carter stepped, gripping her lunch tray with both hands. 16 years old, quiet-eyed, the new black girl, whose name people still pretended not to know, she scanned the room for an empty table, just one seat. Just a corner where the world wasn't aimed at her. She wasn't asking for much. A place to exist, a place to breathe. But Riverside High wasn't known for mercy. As she crossed between tables, Bryce Halloran watched her like a predator spotting movement in tall grass. Tall, broad, wrapped in his varsity jacket like a badge of untouchable privilege, Bryce didn't just sit. He occupied space. His friends sprawled beside him, the clique girls stretched out like they were posing for a campus brochure, cameras already half raised in expectation of chaos. Just as Lonnie passed, Bryce smirked and casually stretched his leg across the walkway. She never saw it. Her foot caught the edge of his shoe, her balance snapped, and the tray flew out of her hands. Food splattered across the tile like an explosion. The impact rattled up her arms as she hit the floor, cold sauce soaking into the sleeve of her jacket, the smell of cafeteria pasta clinging to her skin. Then came the laughter. Fast, loud, cruel, a wave of mockery rolling over her from every corner of the room. Lonnie blinked hard, swallowed the burn rising in her chest, and pushed herself up. She didn't look at them, didn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, she dusted off the food, wiped her hands on a napkin, and straightened her back. No tears, no reaction, just a quiet, unshakable composure. And somehow, that offended Bryce more than anything else. He slid off his bench, boots thudding as he stepped directly in front of her, hovering, blocking her escape with his broad shoulders and the stench of arrogance. "You gonna apologize?" he said, tilting his chin down at her. "For messing up my shoes?" His voice wasn't a request. It was a threat dipped in entitlement. Lonnie met his eyes, calm, steady, unbroken. "No." The room gasped like someone had pulled the fire alarm. Bryce's smirk dropped. For a split second, something uncertain flickered across his face. Confusion, maybe even fear, before it twisted back into rage. He grabbed the abandoned tray from the floor, lifted it high, and slammed the mess straight into her face. The sound echoed like a slap. Sauce dripped down her cheek. Her breath hitched. Cameras lifted. The clique girls whispered, "Oh my God, she's done for." But Lonnie didn't flinch. She just stared at him, cold, silent, bullet steady, and Bryce took half a step back before he even realized he'd moved. Something in her eyes, something he didn't understand, knocked the certainty out of him. The cafeteria hushed, not out of sympathy, out of anticipation, because Bryce Halloran couldn't let that look stand. Not from her, not in front of the school. His fists curled, his jaw locked, and inside his head a single thought lit up like a fuse. "I'm gonna fix that attitude." Bryce wasn't done humiliating her. He was just getting warmed up, and his next move would shatter the cafeteria's illusion of safety. The moment Bryce's tray hit Laney's face, the cafeteria transformed, not into silence. Silence would have meant shame, Instead, the noise sharpened, twisted, and tightened into something electric. Students pushed back their chairs, phones shot into the air, and bodies shuffled instinctively to form a circle around the two of them, like they were spectators gathering for a ritual they'd seen too many times and cared too little about. Lonnie wiped the sauce from her cheek, breath steady, shoulders squared. That single moment of stillness made Bryce snap. It was like her composure was a direct insult to the hierarchy he believed he ruled. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he snarled. But Lonnie didn't move. The crowd egged him on. "Do it, Bryce. Teach her a lesson. Live stream is on. Hurry!" The words weren't thrown out lightly. They were invitations to violence, and Bryce answered. In one brutal motion, he raised his fist and punched Lonnie hard across the face. The sound cracked through the cafeteria like knuckles on a metal locker. The impact knocked her sideways, her ribs crashing into a lunch table before she collapsed forward onto it. Air fled her lungs in a single, strangled gasp, the kind that made the world tilt and narrow into a tunnel of ringing pain. The cafeteria erupted. Cheers, screams, phones zooming in. Someone shouted, "Holy crap, he dropped her!" But Bryce wasn't satisfied. He moved quickly, drawing his arm back for another strike. This time, Lonnie moved. Barely, almost imperceptibly. Just a shift of her head, a slip of her shoulder. But it made Bryce's fist cut through empty air. His momentum dragged him half a step forward, and confusion flashed across his face before he masked it with more anger. "What? Did you just dodge me?" he spat, voice cracking. Lonnie didn't answer. She stayed hunched over the table, both palms pressed down, breathing in tiny, controlled sips, like she was forcing her body to obey her mind. The room watched her, eyes darting between the girl who refused to fight and the boy who didn't know how to deal with resistance this quiet. Then came the whisper, soft, quick, spreading like smoke through the circle of students. "Wait, I heard she was a brown belt back at her old school." "What? Seriously?" "My cousin lives there. He said she did tournaments." The rumor traveled fast. Too fast. Bryce heard it. He froze. And for the first time since the confrontation began, his expression shifted from rage to something uglier. Fear blended with wounded pride. "You think you're better than me?" he snapped. "You think you can fight? Then fight me." But Lonnie stayed silent, her knuckles whitening on the edge of the table as she tried to keep herself folded inward, contained, controlled. She looked like she was trying to restrain a part of herself that didn't want to stay hidden. The restraint only enraged Bryce further. Without warning, he lunged behind her, grabbed a fistful of her hair, and yanked her upright with a vicious jerk. The pain shot down her spine, her eyes squeezing shut for a split second as her breath broke. The crowd roared. The clique girls shrieked with excitement. Someone yelled, "Get closer! I need a better angle!" And amid it all, a single figure stood at the edge of the circle, holding up his phone. Not just streaming, but recording every second with precision. Eli Ramirez, a quiet sophomore known for filming everything, bit his lip as he watched Bryce drag Lonnie by her hair. His hands trembled, but he never stopped recording. Then, almost mechanically, he tapped his screen. Sent a video file. Forwarded to a number saved under one name in his phone. Unknown writer. A name no one at Riverside High had ever heard of. A name Eli had never expected to use. And as that file left his phone, the first domino in a much larger storm began to fall. One that Bryce Halloran had no idea was coming. The air outside Riverside High felt different than inside. Colder, quieter, too still for a school buzzing with lunchtime chaos. The sun baked the concrete courtyard, and the faint smell of exhaust drifted in from the student parking lot. It was the kind of place where secrets could slip between buildings unnoticed, where whispers traveled faster than the truth. 15-year-old Finn Morales stood alone near the bike rack, thumbs shaking over his phone screen. His backpack hung open, camera gear spilling out like he'd sprinted out of the cafeteria without thinking. Which wasn't far from the truth. He'd run because he couldn't breathe. Not after what he'd seen Bryce do. Not after realizing no teacher, none, was going to help that girl. Finn wasn't a fighter. He wasn't brave. He wasn't even popular. But he was a kid who filmed everything. Lunchtime pranks, football chants, cafeteria fights. He'd posted clips to his tiny vlog channel for 2 years just to feel like he existed somewhere. And today, with his heart pounding and his chest tight, he had filmed the most violent thing he'd ever captured. Lonnie's face hitting the table, Bryce's fist cutting through the air, her body twisting under the force, her silence, her eyes. The video replayed in Finn's mind like an image burned into film. He swallowed hard, wiped sweat off his palms, and did something he'd never done before. He forwarded the video. Not to his channel, not to a private group, but to a number saved deep in his phone under the contact name Unknown Writer. Finn didn't know his real name, didn't know his face, didn't know anything except one fact. Unknown Writer always watched the live streams, always, and every time a student got hurt, the man would text Finn afterward, asking questions Finn never understood. At first, Finn thought it was creepy. Then he thought it was protective. Now he wasn't sure which was worse. His phone buzzed only seconds after he hit send. A message popped onto the screen. Unknown Writer. Don't delete the clip. I'm coming. Finn froze. A cold rush spread down his spine as he stared at the words. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, loud, panicked, pounding like a warning drum. His thumb hovered over the screen, trembling so hard the phone nearly slipped. Then a second notification appeared. An image, a profile icon, a skull, wings, a spinning motorcycle rim behind it. Finn blinked twice to make sure he wasn't imagining it, because the logo wasn't a fake, wasn't fan-made, wasn't a prank. It was the real Hell's Angels patch, the iconic death head emblem no ordinary person should have access to. Holy! Finn's voice cracked in his throat. His stomach dropped straight through the pavement. This wasn't a random biker. This wasn't some edgy adult watching student fights for fun. This was someone connected, deeply, to one of the most feared motorcycle clubs on the planet. And he had the video. Finn snapped out of his shock, instinct taking over. He stuffed his camera gear back into his bag, nearly breaking a lens in the process. His breath came fast and sharp. Lonnie didn't know what was coming. Bryce didn't know what he'd triggered. No one understood what one forwarded video could unleash. Finn sprinted back toward the cafeteria doors, sneakers slapping concrete, lungs burning. As he pushed through the hallway, he muttered to himself, "They're coming! They're actually coming! Oh, God, she has no idea!" He skidded into the cafeteria entrance, eyes wide, scanning the chaotic crowd, and then his heart stopped, because he was already too late. At the center of the circle, Bryce Halloran had his fist drawn back, shoulders squared, jaw tight, arm cocked, ready to land the strongest punch he'd thrown all day. And Laney Carter, still trying to breathe, still refusing to fight, was directly in his line of fire. The blow Bryce was about to deliver wouldn't just change her day. It would ignite something far bigger than the cafeteria, something already roaring to life miles away. Food was smeared across the table like a battlefield, sauce dripping down the metal edge, crushed vegetables clinging to Bryce's jacket sleeve, a half-smashed carton of milk leaking onto the floor. The cafeteria stank of heat, sweat, and cheap cafeteria pasta. Phones hovered above the chaos, like vultures circling a dying animal. And in the middle of it all, Lonnie Carter lay half-sprawled on the table, chest heaving, fingers gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles turned ghost white. Bryce Halloran didn't hesitate. He planted his hand on her throat. Not enough to choke, not enough to kill, just enough pressure to send a message. You belong beneath me. His palm pressed into her skin, hot and heavy, and he leaned down until their noses were a breath apart. "You think you're tough, don't you?" he growled. "You think you're strong? Look at you now. Lonnie swallowed, her breath thin and shaky. Bryce's weight pinned her in place. His forearm braced against the table beside her head. His shadow fell over her face, drowning her in the scent of sweat and arrogance. She inhaled slowly through her nose, steadying herself, refusing to let her body flinch or her eyes close. Her mind wasn't on the pain. It was on the promise she'd made long before arriving at Riverside High. A promise to herself, to someone she loved, to never snap first. The room buzzed with whispers. Bryce is gonna knock her out. She's done. Why isn't she fighting back? The clique girls leaned in closer. Phones zoomed to maximum. Drama was the only thing they hunted. Bryce grinned, an ugly stretch of lips that didn't reach his eyes. "What's wrong?" he taunted. "No comeback? No attitude? You look a lot smaller when you're under my hand." Lonnie's nails dug into the table. Her heartbeat hammered in her ears. Her throat tightened, not from Bryce's grip, but from restraint. She lifted her eyes to his, calm, sharp, controlled, and whispered, "You don't want to hit me again. Trust me." Bryce froze, just a fraction of a second, just enough time for something unfamiliar, uncertainty, flash across his features, but then the room's adrenaline drowned it. "What did you just say?" he snapped. Lonnie held his stare, her voice low, almost steady. "You don't want to do this?" For Bryce, her words weren't a warning. They were an insult, a challenge, a slap to his pride in front of every witness he needed to impress. His face reddened, his jaw flexed. "You think you can scare me?" he hissed. "You think you can threaten me in my cafeteria?" He slammed her back against the table again, harder this time. Students screamed. Someone shouted for him to stop, but no one moved. The teachers still weren't there. Authority had simply evaporated. Laney's eyes squeezed shut for half a heartbeat, her breath leaving her chest in a pained sigh. When she opened them again, something had changed. A light, a spark, a flicker in her gaze. Not fear, not submission, something closer to a warning, something ancient, something instinctive. And for the first time all day, Bryce stepped back involuntarily. Just an inch, just enough to betray that he felt it too. The shift in her gaze, the unspoken message, "I am not what you think I am." Before Bryce could react, before he could tighten his grip again or snap out another insult, a voice tore across the cafeteria like a lightning bolt. "Hey, someone's being watched. A biker is coming, right now." Every head snapped toward the entrance. It was Finn Morales, breathless, panic contorting his face, eyes wild with something that didn't belong in a school. Phones lowered, whispers stalled, a tremor went through the room. But Bryce didn't release Lonnie. His pride couldn't allow it, and his fist was already rising again. Whatever blow Bryce was about to deliver would collide with a storm none of them saw coming, one already roaring through the streets outside. The cafeteria doors slammed open with a metallic clatter, letting in a rush of hallway light that washed pale across the chaos. Ms. Gibson, the hall monitor with a reputation for strictness, appeared first. Behind her was Coach Wells, towering, broad-shouldered, the kind of man students expected would break up fights without hesitation. Both stopped dead. From their vantage point at the door, they saw everything. Bryce pinning Lonnie by the throat against the slick cafeteria table, his fist pulled back again, students screaming, phones raised. The scene looked less like school discipline and more like a public beating, and yet neither teacher moved. Ms. Gibson's breath hitched. She grabbed the doorframe with one hand, her knuckles whitening. "Oh, God, Bryce, again?" Coach Wells clenched his jaw so hard the muscle twitched down his neck, but he stayed rooted to the spot. Sweat gathered at his temples. "Do something," Ms. Gibson whispered harshly. Coach Wells didn't look at her. "You know I can't." Her head snapped toward him. "Can't or won't? Same thing," he muttered, because everyone knew the truth. Every student, every teacher, every parent. Bryce Halloran wasn't just a kid. He was the son of Richard Halloran, president of the parent council, a man who treated Riverside High like his personal business venture, a man who fired teachers like swatting flies, a man who once got the principal replaced after a single disagreement. Bryce walked the school with a shield no uniformed staff could break. So the two adults did what adults in Riverside High had learned to do. They watched. They pretended someone else would intervene. They prayed not to be seen failing. Miss Gibson's voice cracked. "He's choking her," Coach Wells swallowed. "If we step in, we're gone. Both of us." "And if we don't?" she asked, eyes shining. He didn't answer. Inside the circle, Lonnie's breath rasped against Bryce's grip. Her fingers dug into the table. The crowd roared like a stadium hungry for blood. It was a nightmare Miss Gibson recognized too well. She had seen this pattern before in too many hallways, too many complaints buried under paperwork, too many incidents swept aside to keep the Hallorans happy. But this time, something was different. This time, the whole world was watching, because on the other side of the cafeteria, Finn Morales' live stream wasn't just capturing Bryce's assault, it was capturing the teachers doing absolutely nothing. Finn's camera panned by accident, or maybe instinct, straight toward the doorway. The lens caught the exact moment Ms. Gibson froze, caught the twitch in Coach Wells's jaw, caught their eyes locked on violence they refused to stop. And the live stream chat exploded. "Bro, the teachers are just watching? What kind of school is this? Someone call the cops. Send the clip to Ironblood. He'll fix it." "Ironblood? You're insane." Finn stared at the comments, pulse pounding. Ironblood, the one name he'd been terrified to see. The name tied to the Hells Angels patch flashing in his messages earlier. His hand shook so violently he nearly dropped his phone. If the commenters recognized the name, if they were daring him, if Unknown Rider really was watching. Ms. Gibson stepped forward half a pace, then backed away again when Bryce slammed Lonnie harder against the table. "We're going to lose our jobs," she whispered. Coach Wells stared at her hollowly. "We're going to lose more than that." Outside, just beyond the double doors, a distant rumble began to grow. Not students, not cars, not anything a school was prepared for. A low, thunderous vibration rolled across the parking lot like something tearing the air apart. Ms. Gibson stiffened. Coach Wells turned pale. Finn's phone vibrated at the exact same moment. A notification from Unknown Rider. "I'm close." And then, from the parking lot, the unmistakable roar of a Harley engine ripped through the campus. The first motorcycle was already turning into Riverside High, and the storm they feared had finally arrived. The parking lot of Riverside High was usually full of harmless noise, car doors slamming, music leaking from open windows, students shouting over engines that coughed instead of roared. But at 12:23 p.m., every familiar sound was drowned beneath something far heavier, deeper, and unmistakable. A Harley-Davidson engine. Then another, then another. The vibrations rolled across the asphalt like shock waves, rattling the cafeteria windows and making dust tremble off the brick walls. Students who wandered outside mid-lunch froze mid-step. Some dropped their drinks. Others stared wide-eyed as the noise grew, multiplied, merged into a single thunderous growl, powerful enough to shake lungs, and then the bikes appeared. 10 massive Harley-Davidsons turned into the parking lot in formation, chrome glinting under the sun, exhaust pipes spitting fire. They weren't speeding. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was a warning. The engines revved once, a single coordinated roar, and the ground shuddered like something alive. Students stumbled backward. A few screamed. Someone yelled, "Are we being attacked?" Another whispered, "No, that's a club. That's, oh my God," because each rider wore the same backpatch. Hells Angels, California, Death Head Emblema symbol. No one dared to mistake. The lead bike rolled forward, jet black with matte metal and hand-painted symbols. The man riding it killed the engine and swung his leg over with calm, terrifying precision. Axel Iron Blood Carter. He didn't look like a parent picking up a child. He looked like a man who ended wars. His arms were covered in black and red tattoos, snakes, skulls, burning chains, inked so densely it looked like armor. His leather jacket hung open, revealing a white tee stained with road dust. His boots were steel-toed, heavy, built for kicking down doors. And his eyes were nothing but cold steel, focused, feral, unmistakably dangerous. The moment his boots hit the pavement, silence fell across the parking lot. Even the engines behind him idled quieter, as if giving way to the man who outranked them all. Axel didn't survey the school, didn't look around, didn't acknowledge the students backing away from him like he was a walking earthquake. He simply adjusted his gloves, cracked his neck, and said in a low, gravel-choked voice, "I'm here for my daughter. Where is she?" The nearest students stepped back. One girl pointed a shaking hand toward the building. "She's inside. Cafeteria. There's a fight. Bryce. He... Axel didn't wait for details. Behind him, one of the bikers, broad, tattooed, with a braid swinging behind his helmet, stepped forward. "Boss," he said, voice rumbling, "we got eyes on the live stream." Axel turned his head slightly. Just slightly. Enough for the sun to catch the scar that ran down his jawline like a blade mark. "Live stream?" he repeated quietly. The biker nodded and raised his phone. "Yeah, whole school's watching. The kid, Bryce, he's got his hands on her." Something dark flickered underneath Axel's ribs. Not rage, not panic. Purpose. A purpose sharpened by years of violence, loyalty, and the kind of fatherhood the world rarely believed men like him possessed. His voice dropped lower than a growl. "Which way?" The biker pointed toward the double doors. "Straight ahead. Through the hall. You'll hear the shouting." Axel inhaled once, slowly, and exhaled like a threat. He didn't run. He didn't rush. He didn't break formation. He simply started walking, each footstep heavy enough to echo. The other 9 bikers flanked him like a moving wall of leather and fury. Students scattered. Some dropped their phones. Others scrambled to flee the parking lot. Someone sobbed into their hands. Nobody, not one person, dared to step in front of Axel Carter. Nobody was stupid enough to try, and when he reached the doors, a final voice came from behind him. "Cafeteria." "And boss, the whole world's watching." Axel didn't turn back. He pushed the doors open with one hand, and as he stepped inside the school, every scream from the cafeteria became a countdown no one could stop. The cafeteria had never felt louder. Students screamed, chairs toppled, trays clattered to the floor. Bryce's friends backed away in panic while others crowded closer, phones raised high, desperate to capture every violent second. The room pulsed with hysteria, until a sound cut through it like a blade, a heavy thud, then another, bootsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the hall like something ancient breaking free. The cafeteria doors slammed open so hard they hit the wall, and the chaos died instantly. Axel Ironblood Carter stepped inside. It wasn't just his size, though he was built like a storm wrapped in leather, thick forearms covered in ink, a chest broad enough to fill a doorway, shoulders that had carried both violence and family in equal measure. It wasn't just the jacket, stitched with the Hell's Angels patch glowing red under the fluorescent lights. It wasn't the scar slicing down his jaw. It was the stillness, a stillness so violent that the air itself tightened around it, a presence that didn't announce itself with shouts or threats, a presence that simply existed, and in existing, dominated everything. The moment Axel crossed the threshold, every phone lowered, every whisper died, every student's breath stalled in their throat. Even the clique girls, seconds earlier shrieking for more drama, went silent as if someone had pressed a mute button. Bryce Halloran, fist still raised in mid-air, froze like a statue. His eyes widened, his lips parted, His grip on Lonnie's hair loosened, fingers twitching as if they'd been burned, and then, as if yanked by an invisible force, Bryce let go of her completely. His hand slipped off her throat. His chest rose in a shaky breath. Color drained from his face until he looked sick because Bryce recognized the patch, recognized the man, recognized the reputation that traveled miles ahead of Axel Carter. What is he doing here?" Someone whispered from the crowd. Axel didn't answer. He didn't look at them. His eyes locked on one person only, Bryce. The stare was surgical, cold, steady, cutting straight through Bryce's skull like a drill. No yelling, no threats, just a living, breathing warning forged from decades of street loyalty and blood. Bryce stumbled back one step, hitting the table behind him. He tried to stand taller, but his legs wobbled. Coach Wells, watching from the door, mouthed a silent prayer. Axel didn't move closer, didn't raise a hand, didn't even blink. It didn't matter. His stillness alone pressed down on Bryce like a mountain. Then, slowly, Axel broke eye contact and turned. He turned toward the one person in the room who mattered, toward Lonnie, who was still hunched against the table edge, chest rising fast, hair tangled, throat red where Bryce's hand had been. Axel walked to her, not rushed, not frantic, but with a precision that made the room feel even smaller. His boots thudded softly against the tile. Students leaned away from him like the floor was melting. When he reached her side, he crouched down, just enough to be at her eye level. His voice dropped into something softer, roughened by fear and fury he refused to show outwardly. "Baby, are you hurt?" The room inhaled sharply. Nobody expected that. Nobody imagined the monster of the parking lot kneeling beside his daughter with the gentleness of a man who'd kill to protect her. Lonnie nodded once, eyes glassy but unbroken. Axel touched the side of her jaw lightly, examining the blooming bruise. His fingers trembled for half a second. Only she noticed. The crowd didn't breathe. Then a sound broke the spell, a short, shaky laugh. Bryce, masking his fear, clinging to whatever pride he had left, straightened his jacket and forced a smirk. "Look, man, this is between students, okay? You can't just—" He stopped when Axel slowly rose to his full height. Very slowly. Bryce swallowed hard. His voice died in his throat. Yet pride was a parasite, and Bryce Halloran wasn't about to let himself be outshined. So he stepped forward again, desperately mustering a reaction that would soon cost him everything. The cafeteria was a wreck. Tables overturned, food sliding off broken trays, milk pooling on the floor like a white puddle of disaster. The room reeked of sweat, fear, and something metallic beneath it all. Panic. Phones had stopped recording. Students had stopped whispering. Every eye was locked on the man standing like a storm at the center of their world, Axel Ironblood Carter, and standing a few feet from him, trembling yet trying to pretend otherwise, was Bryce Halloran. Bryce's pride, shredded by fear only moments earlier, suddenly twisted into something desperate. An ugly, reckless need to save face. He puffed out his chest, shoulders trembling, and yelled, "Who the hell do you think you are? Coming into my school? Getting into school business?" His voice cracked in the middle. Everyone heard it. Axel didn't flinch. He didn't turn. He didn't even glance at Bryce. He simply took one slow, quiet step forward, right past the boy who was screaming at him. Bryce blinked, confused, then turned and realized Axel wasn't approaching him at all. Axel was walking toward the doorway, toward Ms. Gibson and Coach Wells, the two adults who had stood frozen, watching a violent assault unfold without lifting a finger. The students watched, breathless, whispering among themselves, "He's not going for Bryce? No way! What is he doing?" Ms. Gibson took a step back, her spine hitting the metal frame of the door. Coach Wells squared his shoulders instinctively, but even he looked as if the ground were about to open beneath him. Axel stopped just 3 feet in front of them. Silence stretched, a heavy, suffocating silence. Then he spoke, quiet, steady. A voice that felt like it was carved out of gravel. "You two saw everything." Neither teacher replied. "You watched a grown boy choke my daughter." His face didn't change, but the room seemed to darken around him. "You watched him slam her, punch her, drag her." Another step forward. "And you didn't move. Not once." Miss Gibson's lips trembled. "Sir, we—" Axel interrupted softly, almost gently. "That makes you worse than him." The cafeteria gasped in one collective inhale. Plot twist number 6 had landed like a knife. Coach Wells stiffened. Miss Gibson's breathing hitched, her shoulders trembling. There was no yelling, no accusation, just the blunt, unshakable truth spoken by a man who had seen enough cruelty in the world to recognize cowardice instantly. The shock rippled through the students. He's right. They really didn't do anything. This is bad. For everyone. Axel held their gaze. All the fear, all the guilt, all the shame reflected in their eyes, then slowly turned away, dismissing them as if they were already irrelevant. Miss Gibson's knees buckled. Her hand shot out to steady herself on the wall. Her entire body shook. Her voice cracked into the air like a confession. "Oh, God, what have we done?" But Axel was already walking back to the center of the cafeteria. The room, sensing the shift, parted for him like water around a ship. His boots thudded against the tile. His leather jacket creaked. His shadow stretched long and heavy across the floor until it stopped at Bryce's feet. Bryce tried to stand tall, to regain some scrap of authority, but the moment Axel turned to face him fully, the boy's knees nearly buckled. Axel looked down at him, not with anger, not even with hatred, but with something far worse, judgment. He lowered his chin slightly, locking eyes with Bryce. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the cafeteria, felt more than heard. "Now, you're going to answer me." The entire school held its breath. Bryce swallowed, Adam's apple bouncing like it was trying to escape his throat. Then Axel asked the question that froze every spine in the room. "Why were you putting your hands on my daughter?" And Bryce Halloran suddenly realized that lying wasn't an option, and the truth would be even more dangerous than the fist he'd almost thrown. Bryce Halloran had been hit before. He'd been screamed at, shoved by coaches, scolded by teachers, but nothing had ever pinned him in place the way Axel Iron Blood Carter's voice did. The cafeteria was so silent that even the buzzing fluorescent lights sounded loud. Axel stood inches from Bryce, his shadow swallowing half the boy's body. His voice cut through the air like a blade, low, steady, patient in a way that felt more dangerous than shouting. "Tell me," Axel said, leaning in just enough for Bryce to feel the heat radiating off him. "Do you have the guts to say why you put your hands on my daughter?" Bryce's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His throat closed, clogged by fear. The entire room watched him unravel. Students pressed forward, breath held. Phones rose slowly again, not to cheer, but to witness. Bryce stammered, I didn't, she tripped." Axel raised a single brow, one eyebrow, no words, and Bryce fell silent again. The lie died before it was born. Drama settled over the cafeteria like a fog, heavy, suffocating, impossible to ignore. Bryce looked around, desperate for backup, but his friends took a step back. The clique girls lowered their phones. Even Coach Wells looked away. No one wanted to share the blast radius. Then, from somewhere deep in the circle of students, a sound cracked through the silence. A sob. Not loud, not theatrical, just raw. A small black girl, freshman, maybe 15, pushed herself into the open, tears streaking down her cheeks. Her hands trembled at her sides. "Stop lying, Bryce." Her voice broke. "Just stop." Bryce flinched. What are you talking about? Get back." But she didn't. She wiped her face with her sleeve and choked out the words that detonated the entire room. "You hate black students. You made a group chat just to make fun of people like us. You posted memes. You called us animals." Gasps ricocheted through the cafeteria. Another voice joined in. Another student, then another. He added us without permission. He called my cousin a slur. He said people like us shouldn't be here. He told us to go back to where we came from. It wasn't one accusation. It wasn't two. It was a chorus. Years of hidden cruelty pouring out all at once. Plot twist number 7 hit Bryce like a fist he couldn't dodge. His face drained of color. His breath came out in shallow bursts. He tried to shout back, "Lies! They're lying!" But the words sounded small, weak, childlike. The crowd no longer feared him. They despised him, and the air changed. It thickened, darkened, crackled with something new, collective anger. Someone yelled, "You racist jerk!" Another shouted, "Get him out of here!" A wave of voices rose all at once. Screams, insults, shouts, overlapping, crashing into Bryce like a tidal wave. For the first time in his life, Bryce Halloran wasn't the predator. He was prey, cornered, exposed. His knees bent slightly as if the weight of the truth was physically crushing him. Axel didn't look away from Bryce during any of it. He stood still, arms at his sides, breathing controlled, watching, evaluating, letting the truth burn the air clean. Then he spoke, quietly, clearly, with no room for misunderstanding. "You're going to apologize," Axel said. "In front of every single person in this room." The cafeteria fell silent again. This time out of shock. Bryce swallowed hard, chest rising unevenly. He looked like a building about to collapse. "No," he whispered. "You can't make me—" Axel stepped forward. Just one step, enough to silence Bryce mid-sentence. "Say it," Axel repeated. The command wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Students leaned closer. Teachers froze. Even the air held its breath. What Bryce Halloran said next, or refused to say, would determine not only his fate, but the fate of the adults who had let all of this happen. The cafeteria lights burned too bright, washing the room in a harsh whiteness that made every detail feel sharper, uglier, impossible to ignore. Hundreds of students crowded around the center of the chaos, their faces pale with shock, phones lifted again. Not for entertainment now, but because nobody wanted to forget what was happening. In the middle of that suffocating circle stood Bryce Halloran, or rather, what was left of him. His varsity jacket hung crooked on one shoulder, sweat dripping down his temples, hands trembling so badly he had to curl them into fists to hide it. His eyes darted from Axel Carter's unmoving figure to the students surrounding him, to the live-streaming phones capturing his humiliation from every angle. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. No story he could spin, no excuse he could invent. Axel didn't speak, didn't push, didn't threaten. He simply stood with his arms folded and his jaw clenched, a silent reminder that truth had weight, and it had finally fallen on Bryce's shoulders. "Bryce," someone whispered, "just say it. You dug this grave." "Do it," Bryce swallowed, knees wobbling. Axel's voice cut the air like a blade. "On your knees." A gasp rippled through the room. Even the live-stream chat exploded in all caps. Bryce stared at him, horrified. You can't, this is—" But his voice cracked, and the moment it cracked, he knew he had lost. Axel didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to, because the weight of the crowd pressed harder than any physical force. 100 eyes drilling into Bryce. A dozen phones filming his downfall, 10 bikers standing like an iron wall behind Axel, and Lonnie, bruised, breath trembling, but still standing. Bryce's pride fought back for a moment. His jaw tightened, his teeth clenched, a last flicker of rebellion. But rebellion couldn't survive under this kind of pressure, not when the entire school demanded accountability. Slowly, painfully, his knees bent. He dropped onto the cafeteria floor. The sound echoed. A dull, humiliating thud. A collective exhale swept the room. Students stared, wide-eyed. Some recorded with shaky hands. Others whispered, "No way. No way he actually did it." Bryce lifted his face toward Lonnie, eyes glassy with rage and humiliation. "His voice cracked. "I'm sorry." The words tasted like acid. Tears spilled onto his cheeks, hot, shaking, uncontrollable. Not tears of guilt, but tears of defeat. His shoulders shook as years of entitlement crashed under the weight of his own actions. "I'm sorry," he repeated, louder this time, voice breaking. "I shouldn't have touched you. Not today, not ever. I shouldn't have done any of it," students murmured, stunned. Even Coach Wells flinched. Ms. Gibson covered her mouth. Bryce wiped his nose on the back of his sleeve, choking on his pride. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, crumbling. And then a shift, not in Bryce, not in the crowd. In Lonnie. She stepped forward, slow, steady, spine straight despite her bruises. Her eyes weren't filled with triumph. They weren't filled with revenge. They were filled with truth, and truth could burn hotter than anger. She looked down at Bryce, kneeling before her, and said softly, but loud enough for every phone to capture, "I don't need your apology." The room gasped. Even Bryce jerked his head up, stunned. Lonnie continued, her voice steady despite her shaking fingers. "I need the truth." Her chest rose. Her eyes hardened. All of it. The cafeteria didn't just go silent. It went cold. Students glanced at each other, at their phones, at Bryce, waiting for his reaction. Truth. The one thing he feared more than humiliation. Bryce's face twisted. His mouth opened, but no words came. He wasn't ready to speak. But the truth was already clawing its way toward daylight, and it would break open the entire school before it was done. And as the cafeteria held its breath, the real story, the one Lonnie had carried alone, was finally about to surface. The cafeteria had quieted again, not the excited silence from earlier, but a heavier one, a silence filled with questions, with fear, with the weight of everything that hadn't yet been said. Bryce was still on his knees, trembling, but he was no longer the center of the room. All eyes had shifted to Lanny, and to the man standing beside her. Axel rested a steadying hand on his daughter's shoulder, but even that touch carried a trembling fury beneath the surface. His fingers brushed the bruises forming along her jawline, purple, swollen, fresh. A muscle twitched in his cheek. Lonnie swallowed hard. "Dad," she whispered, voice thin around the ache in her throat. Axel's jaw locked. His hand curled into a fist. "Who did this?" he asked, though he already knew. Lanny glanced briefly at Bryce, then back to her father. She opened her mouth, but what came out wasn't an accusation. It was a confession. "Before we moved here," she said softly, "before Riverside, something happened." Axel's eyes sharpened, his posture stiffening. Lonnie continued, voice shaking but resolute. "There was a girl at my old school. She cornered me in the locker room. She pushed me, kicked my bag, called me names." Lonnie paused, breathing unevenly. "I warned her to stop. She didn't. So She struggled for the right words. "I fought back." Axel blinked, the fury in his gaze hesitating for the first time. "I didn't mean to hurt her," Lonnie added quickly. "I just reacted. Instinct. And they suspended me. They said I was the violent one. They said I had a temper." Her eyes glistened, anger, pain, guilt all merging together. "I promised myself I wouldn't use my fists unless my life was actually in danger. I promised you too." Axel inhaled sharply. He remembered, too clearly, the night she came home shaking, terrified of herself, the promise he made her swear to hold back, to stay safe, to avoid giving people another excuse to demonize her. And now, seeing his daughter bruised, breathless, shaking, that promise felt like a knife. "Lonnie," Axel murmured, voice low, breaking in a way no one else in the cafeteria would ever hear from him. "You did nothing wrong today." His thumb brushed the bruise on her cheek again. His hand tightened into a fist so violently the leather of his glove creaked. "Nothing," he repeated. Lonnie looked down, ashamed. "I tried not to fight. I really did." Axel exhaled a slow, heavy breath, the kind that came before storms. Then he lifted her chin gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You said you wouldn't fight," he murmured, voice raw with restraint. Only if things became dangerous. He angled her face toward the bruise Bryce left behind, his jaw clenched. Well, he said slowly, darkly, today definitely counts as dangerous. The cafeteria shuddered with the weight of his words. A murmur swept through the crowd. Students exchanged nervous glances. Even Bryce, still kneeling, felt the temperature drop. Axel stood upright, shoulders rolling back, and turned, not to Bryce, but to the teachers who had stood frozen through the entire assault. His boots echoed across the tile as he walked toward the stunned staff, the storm in his voice building for the confrontation that awaited. The cafeteria no longer felt like a room full of students. It felt like a courtroom, and the adults standing near the doorway were the accused. Ms. Gibson's hands shook against her clipboard. Coach Wells's shoulders hunched, his breath uneven. Two other staff members lingered behind them, pale and guilt-stricken, as if trying to merge into the wall. And Axel Carter walked toward them with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who had buried too many hesitations in his lifetime. His boots thudded against the cracked tile. Every step made the teachers shrink a little more. When he finally stopped in front of them, he didn't shout. He didn't need to. Explain, Axel said. One word, heavy enough to tilt the floor. Ms. Gibson swallowed. Sir, we couldn't. You wouldn't, Axel corrected, voice calm but sharpened to a blade. You watched my daughter get strangled on a table. Coach Wells stepped forward as if to defend the crowd of trembling adults. We wanted to intervene, believe me, but there are procedures and... Axel's eyebrow lifted. Wells's voice shrank. Bryce's father. He's on the parent council. He decides staffing, funding, approvals. We don't get to keep our jobs if we cross him. There it was. The truth, ugly and quiet. A murmur rippled across the cafeteria. Shock, disgust, betrayal. Axel looked at them, eyes empty of sympathy. So you let a kid choke another kid, he said slowly. Because you were afraid of losing your positions? Ms. Gibson blinked rapidly, her throat closing. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. Axel didn't raise his voice, but his words hit the staff harder than any shout could. You stood there, he continued, watched her being assaulted and did absolutely nothing. You didn't call security. You didn't step in. You didn't even raise your voice. His jaw flexed. The room held its breath. You let a child take the hits because you were scared. Axel leaned closer. And that makes you complicit. Coach Wells flinched like he'd been punched. One of the younger teachers whispered, We didn't know what to do. Axel snapped his gaze toward her, fire sparking behind his eyes. You do now. He took another step, one that made every student in the room lean back on instinct. Then, in a deep, controlled voice, he said, Your power, your counsel, your positions, none of that matters anymore. Not when a live stream with hundreds of viewers is recording every second, Ms. Gibson gasped. Coach Wells froze. The younger teacher's eyes widened. The entire cafeteria felt the shift. The realization that the school's reputation wasn't in the hands of the Halloran family anymore. It was in the hands of thousands of strangers watching the live stream. Axel tilted his chin toward the phones, pointed at them, and delivered the line that made every teacher's blood run cold. Your authority is nothing compared to a video that's live right now. Gasps echoed across the cafeteria. Students nodded. Even Bryce lifted his head, stunned. That was when Coach Wells's composure finally cracked. Please, turn them off, he begged the crowd. Turn the phones off. This will ruin. But it was too late. Notifications chimed across the cafeteria. Likes, comments, followers flooding Finn's stream. The world outside Riverside High had already seen everything. And as the teachers panicked, the consequences they feared began marching straight toward them. Unavoidable, unstoppable, setting the stage for the fallout. The principal's office at Riverside High had never been so crowded, or so silent. The room, normally stiff with the smell of old paper and lemon-scented cleaner, now pulsed with tension thick enough to choke on. Administrators huddled near filing cabinets. Secretaries whispered anxiously near the door. Two district investigators stood with tablets in hand, their expressions carved from stone. And in the center of it all sat Principal Rowan, hands clasped, eyes unfocused, caught in a storm he could no longer control. On the desk before him, Finn's live stream replayed on a loop, the footage flickering across the screen like a damning confession. Bryce choking Lanny, teachers frozen, the bikers arriving. The school descending into chaos, every detail captured, every second documented, every lie impossible to maintain. A knock exploded against the office door. Before anyone could answer, the door was flung open, and Richard Halloran, Bryce's father, stormed inside. His expensive suit strained around his shoulders, his cheeks blotched red with rage. "This is outrageous," he thundered, slamming his hands on Rowan's desk so hard a pen rolled off. "You allowed a gang of criminals onto school property? My son is being humiliated online as we speak." Principal Rowan's voice wavered. "Mr. Halloran, please, sit." "I will not sit," Richard barked. "I demand that video be removed immediately. I demand that boy, what's his name, Morales, be expelled for filming it. And I demand you discipline that Carter girl for provoking my son." The investigators exchanged a glance, a dangerous one, because they had heard enough. "Mr. Halloran," one investigator said calmly, "we're here to conduct a full inquiry, not into the live stream, but into your son's history." Richard's face twisted. "My son did nothing wrong." Another investigator tapped her tablet and turned the screen toward him. On it was a collage of screenshots, group chat logs, racist memes, photos Bryce had posted mocking black students, voice messages threatening Lonnie in the locker hallway days before the attack. "We have over 37 submissions from students," she said, "all detailing your son's repeated harassment, discrimination, and physical aggression over the past 2 years. Richard staggered back as if struck. "That's ridiculous. Those are edited. This is slander." But Principal Rowan, pale and shaking, finally found his voice. "They're not edited. We checked metadata." Richard's mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came. Because for the first time, the truth didn't bend around him. It crushed him. Parents filled the hallway outside the office, murmuring angrily. Reporters on speakerphone demanded statements. The district investigators whispered quietly among themselves. Then, with a weary sigh, Principal Rowan stood. "This school has failed to protect its students," he said, voice trembling but firm. "And Bryce Halloran is at the center of those failures." He turned to the investigators. "We are officially suspending Bryce Halloran pending expulsion proceedings, effective immediately." Richard's knees nearly buckled. "And," Rowan continued, "we're suspending Ms. Gibson and Coach Wells for failing to intervene in a violent altercation." Gasps echoed from the hallway. Teachers covered their mouths in horror. Students pressed their ears against the glass window, listening, but none of it changed the truth. The manipulator had fallen. The protection had shattered. The power dynamics at Riverside High had flipped upside down. And in the midst of the chaos, Lonnie Carter, quiet, bruised, but steady, stood in the doorway of the office, watching it all unfold, but her eyes weren't on Bryce, or his father, or the teachers. She was staring past them, at the one thing she still needed to do, because before this story ended, Lonnie had one final piece of truth left to deliver, leading straight. The next afternoon, Riverside High felt like a school holding its breath. Conversations were quieter. Hallways seemed wider. Students walked in clusters, whispering about suspensions, investigations, and rumors of bikers waiting near town. Bryce's name sat like a bruise on everyone's tongue. Outside in the courtyard, sunlight spilled over the concrete benches and patchy grass. A warm breeze stirred the leaves above, but the atmosphere remained tense. Like the echo of yesterday still clung to the air. Lainey Carter stood near the flagpole, fingers tucked into the sleeves of her hoodie. The purple mark on her jaw had darkened, but her eyes were calm, not cold, not angry, just steady. She knew he was coming, and moments later, Bryce Halloran stepped into the courtyard. No varsity jacket, no smirk, no entourage. Just a 17-year-old boy, stripped of arrogance, walking like someone carrying the weight of consequences for the first time in his life. He stopped a few feet from her, unsure whether he had the right to get closer. "Lonnie," he began, voice low. She didn't let him finish. "I'm not here for another apology," she said gently, though her words cut through the space like clean glass. "You already gave me one." Bryce swallowed hard, guilt tightening his throat. "I meant it, I know," she replied. "But I don't want you being scared of my dad, or of the people he rides with." Bryce blinked, surprised. "I don't want fear to be the reason you stop hurting people," Lonnie continued. "Fear doesn't last. It fades. And when it fades, people go back to who they were." He stared at her, confused, humbled, silent. "I want you to learn respect," she said. "Not for me, for everyone." Bryce lowered his gaze to the pavement. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback, didn't have an excuse, didn't have anger to hide behind. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't hostile. It was heavy, honest. Lanny softened her voice. "You can't undo what you did yesterday." He nodded, jaw tight. "I know, but you can start facing the people you hurt." Bryce's breath caught. Pain flickered behind his eyes. Shame, regret, something he couldn't name. He looked up at her like he was asking for direction, for permission to try again in a world he'd helped poison. "Lonnie," he whispered, "I don't know if they'll even listen to me." "They don't have to forgive you," she said. "They just deserve to be acknowledged." Her words hung there, quiet, powerful, irreversible. Then she delivered the line that broke whatever pride he had left. "You don't owe me another apology. You owe them." Her chin tilted toward the far side of the courtyard. Bryce turned, and there they were, a small group of students, black, Hispanic, Asian, standing near the benches, the ones he had mocked in group chats, the ones he'd pushed in hallways, the ones he'd targeted when no one was watching. They didn't look angry. They looked tired, tired of him, tired of fear, tired of being targets. Bryce's throat tightened. His feet felt glued to the ground. Laney stepped aside, making a path for him. "This is your chance," she said softly. "Don't waste it." Bryce inhaled shakily, shoulders trembling, and took his first step toward the people he'd hurt. And as he approached the group, the final shift began to take form, leading where Riverside High would face the aftermath of everything that happened. 1 week later, Riverside High felt like a different school. The echo of lockers slamming still filled the hallways, and the cafeteria still smelled like stale French fries and disinfectant, but something underneath the noise had shifted. Conversations were quieter. Students carried themselves differently. Teachers watched more closely. The atmosphere, once thick with tension and unspoken fear, now held a strange, unfamiliar weight, accountability. Posters lined the walls. "Zero tolerance for violence. Report bullying. No exceptions. Your voice matters." Assemblies had been held. Counselors brought in. New protocols explained. And every teacher on staff underwent mandatory training. How to intervene, how to de-escalate, how to protect every student, not just the ones with powerful parents. Riverside High was still flawed, still imperfect, still learning, but it was trying. For the first time in years, it was trying. The courtyard buzzed gently with early morning chatter. The sun warmed the pavement. Wind stirred the flag overhead. Students passed each other with soft nods rather than hard stares. And as the first period bell approached, a familiar figure appeared at the school gate. Axel Ironblood Carter. No leather jacket today, no boots that echoed like thunder, no army of bikers behind him, just a father, standing with his hands in his pockets, posture relaxed, expression unreadable, except for the softness in his eyes reserved for one person only. He didn't hover. He didn't intimidate. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. Whispers rippled through passing students. "Is that Lonnie's dad? I heard he's part of the Hells Angels. No bikers today? He doesn't need them. Well, after what happened, who would dare mess with her?" Axel ignored the chatter. He simply stood at the gate, watching the doors, waiting in the quiet way only fathers who had nearly lost something precious understood. A moment later, those doors swung open, and Lonnie Carter stepped outside. She walked differently now, not with arrogance, not with fear, but with a calm, grounded confidence that came from surviving something brutal and from knowing the world around her had finally opened its eyes. The bruise on her jaw had faded to yellow. Her shoulders were relaxed, her steps steady. When she spotted Axel, a small, genuine smile tugged at her lips. "Hey, Dad," she said softly. He nodded once. "Morning, baby." They didn't need more words, because everything between them had already been said, in violence, in truth, in choices, in silence. Lonnie glanced back at the school. The hallways that once felt hostile, now filled with teachers trained to intervene, students empowered to speak up, and rules enforced not by fear, but by collective understanding. She wasn't alone anymore, not at Riverside, not anywhere. Her gaze softened, and Axel, watching her see the world with new steadiness, exhaled a breath he'd been holding for days. Students passing by looked at the pair with something new. Respect. Not fear. Not curiosity. Respect. Lonnie reached for her backpack strap, tightening it with a quiet resolve. She stepped beside her father, eyes clear, voice low but certain. "No one's ever laying a hand on Ironblood Carter's daughter again." Axel smirked faintly, pride flickering in his eyes. And with that, Riverside High's darkest week faded into something else. A turning point, a warning, and a promise carved into the school's history forever. And that's how Riverside High learned a lesson the hard way. A fist thrown at the wrong girl can echo loud enough to shake the entire town. Bryce lost his power, the teachers lost their excuses, and Lonnie walked out stronger, with her father's shadow behind her and her own voice in front. Justice didn't come quietly. It arrived on roaring engines. Now I want to hear from you. What moment in this story shocked you the most, and why? If you felt this ride, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next story that hits just as hard.